The most unforgettable women who ever sat on Johnny Carson's couch for 30 years, one desk in Burbank saw more legends pass through it than almost any stage in television history. But a handful of nights stood apart, nights when the audience went quiet, when Carson himself lost his footing, when a single entrance became something people still talk about decades later. One of the women on this list never even showed up. Her absence became a legend of its own. Let's start with the night America's last true movie queen finally, and only once, took the chair across from Johnny. Actor number 1, Elizabeth Taylor. She almost never did it at all. Elizabeth Taylor spent decades turning down late-night television. Interviews fell beneath a woman who'd already lived several lifetimes of headlines. So when she finally agreed to sit across from Johnny Carson on February 21, 1992, NBC treated it like a national event because it was one. It would be her first appearance on the show, and, as it turned out, her only one. Site index equals 26-1. 32-1. Actress Elizabeth Taylor and Tonight Show host Johnny Carson shared a laugh during Taylor's first ever appearance on the show, which aired February 21, 1992. Site fellow guest that night, a young Michael Douglas, riding high off Basic Instinct. The timing mattered more than most viewers realized. Carson himself had only 3 months left before his own retirement. His final broadcast would air May 22, 1992. Taylor, for her part, arrived just days before her 60th birthday. Two icons, both near the close of a chapter, meeting for the first and last time on camera. What unfolded wasn't a puff piece. Carson pushed her on how she'd survived so much, the illnesses, the near-death experiences, the tabloid decades, and Taylor didn't dodge it. Site index equals 30-1. She told him she believed it was because she was a survivor, someone who could serve as a living example of what people endure. Site she spoke of having been pronounced dead once, of having read her own obituaries. She called them, only half joking, the best reviews of her career. It should have felt like a farewell. Instead, it felt like a woman finally letting the world see the toll, and the triumph, behind the legend. But if Taylor's single appearance was rare, one name never showed up on Carson's couch at all. And that absence became the strangest story of actor number 2, Sophia Loren. Johnny Carson did his homework. But nobody expected him to bring a gift. When Sophia Loren finally agreed to sit down with Carson on February 27, 1979, it was already a coup. The Italian icon rarely gave American television interviews. Carson had read her autobiography beforehand, and buried in it was a small, strange detail. Loren believed in wearing something red, visible or hidden, every single day for good luck. He used it. Partway through the interview, Carson produced a box and told her he'd bought her something after finishing her book. Site index equals 12-1. When she opened it, she found a red garter, and Carson admitted, with a grin, that the gift might be a little presumptuous. Site Lauren's reaction wasn't embarrassment. It was delight, and then a surprise of her own. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small red charm she'd carried that day for luck, and handed it to Carson to keep. The conversation before that moment had its own tension. Loren admitted up front she wasn't entirely comfortable giving interviews, and when Carson pressed, gently, whether that discomfort extended to him, she said yes, it did, because she hadn't written a single word about him in her own book. Carson called it damn unfair, then declared himself magnanimous enough to forgive her anyway. By the end, something had shifted. Loren told him she trusted him completely, and even hinted she might get to know him better after the cameras stopped rolling. It was a rare thing, an interview that started guarded and ended almost intimate. But 3 years earlier, a very different kind of guest had walked onto that same stage and left the entire studio speechless before she'd said a single word. Actor number 3, Bo Derek. Nobody was ready for her. By late 1979, the film 10 had turned Bo Derek, a relative unknown just months earlier, into the single most talked about face in America. When she walked onto Carson's stage that November, the reaction wasn't the usual roar of applause. It was something closer to stunned silence, the kind of quiet that comes from an audience trying to process what it's seeing in person rather than on a poster. That's because Derek's Tonight Show appearance wasn't just a victory lap. She sat down and talked openly about filming the movie's now famous nude scenes, a subject most young actresses of that era would have deflected or handled with careful, rehearsed answers. Site index equals 18-1. She discussed her breakout role in 10 and her experience filming those scenes directly, in a conversation that felt disarmingly candid for a newcomer to national television. Site. What made it land, according to those who watched it unfold, wasn't rehearsed glamour, it was the opposite. Derek seemed almost unaware of the machine she'd just been thrown into, no media training, no guarded talking points, just a woman answering questions honestly while the country tried to catch up to her sudden fame. It was the kind of appearance that could only happen once, the exact moment before fame calcifies into performance. Years later, Carson would welcome a very different kind of icon, not a rising star, but the original blueprint for an entire genre of movie stardom, walking straight out of the ocean and into pop culture history. Actor number 4, Ursula Andress. Before there was a Bond girl archetype, there was just Ursula Andress, walking out of the Caribbean Sea. In 1962's Dr. No, Andress played Honey Rider and, in one scene, redefined what a movie entrance could look like. Site index equals 57-1, 59-1. She later said the moment made her a success, giving her the freedom to choose her own roles and to become financially independent for the first time in her career. Site the ivory-colored two-piece she wore, designed by Andress herself alongside director Terrence Young, would go on to sell at auction decades later for tens of thousands of dollars, a testament to just how permanently that image had lodged itself in cinema history. Site index equals 62-1, 64-1. The scene didn't just launch her career, it helped push the bikini itself into the mainstream, a garment considered too risque for widespread wear barely a decade earlier, and it set a template of glamour and confidence that dozens of Bond girls after her would be measured against. Site. When Andress made her way onto Carson's stage in the 1960s, she carried that same self-possessed energy with her, a Swiss actress who spoke multiple languages, who turned one scene into a permanent place in film history, and who talked about her sudden fame with none of the false modesty American audiences might have expected. She didn't perform beauty. She simply had it, and said so. But glamour wasn't the only kind of history being made on that stage. One guest arrived carrying something far heavier than a swimsuit. She was quietly breaking a barrier television hadn't dared cross before. Actor number 5, Diahann Carroll. She didn't just charm the audience. She changed what was possible on American television. When Julia premiered on NBC on September 17, 1968, Diahann Carroll became the first black woman to lead her own weekly television series in a role that wasn't a domestic servant. Site index equals 48-1. It marked American television history, the first time an African-American woman headed the cast of a series where the lead character wasn't playing a maid or housekeeper. Site the role won her a Golden Globe and an Emmy nomination the following year, and it made her, almost overnight, a cultural landmark as much as a star. Carroll had already built a formidable resume before that, a Tony Award in 1962 for No Strings, a Broadway debut at just 19, film roles in Carmen Jones and Porgy and Bess. But it was Julia that turned her into a name synonymous with a genuine turning point in television history. Site index equals 51-1. On Carson's stage, she became a frequent and welcome guest throughout the 1970s and 1980s, charming audiences with her wit and sophistication while discussing her latest projects and sharing stories from her career. Site. Unlike guests who leaned entirely on glamour, Carroll carried the weight of what she represented, a reminder, every time she sat down, of just how recently television had refused to let a woman who looked like her simply be the star of her own show. She'd go on, years later, to reinvent herself again as the scheming Dominique Devereaux on Dynasty. But before any of that, there was another guest who never needed a single line of dialogue to stop a studio audience cold, a beach poster that outsold nearly everything else in American pop culture. Actor number 6, Farrah Fawcett. One photograph. Millions of copies. A single poster that turned an unknown actress into a phenomenon before her show had even finished its first season. In 1976, a poster of Farrah Fawcett in a red swimsuit became one of the best-selling pinups in American history, Moving site index equals 43-16 million copies in its first year in print alone/site, a number that would only keep climbing. That same year, Charlie's Angels premiered on September 22, 1976, with Fawcett starring as private investigator Jill Monroe alongside Kate Jackson and Jacqueline Smith. The show shot straight into the Nielsen Top 10, and Fawcett, almost against her own expectations, became its breakout face. She would later joke about the show's meteoric rise with characteristic candor, crediting the trio's on-screen chemistry rather than taking the attention too seriously herself. Fawcett's relationship with Carson's show became a recurring one rather than a single splash. Documented appearances stretch from 1978, promoting the TV movie Somebody Killed Her Husband, through the 1980s and into a 1992 episode alongside Steve Martin. Each time, she brought the same easy, sun-drenched warmth that had made her a household name in the first place, a contrast to the more composed, guarded energy of some of Hollywood's older guard. It's a strange kind of fame, an entire career eventually overshadowed by a single poster and a single TV season. But Fawcett's Tonight Show visits reveal something the poster never could, an actress who kept showing up, decade after decade, long after Jill Monroe had become a footnote to a much longer career. Before her, though, came the guest whose Tonight Show entrances were, by reputation, a running joke among the crew themselves. Actor number 7, Raquel Welch. The crew had a name for it, the Raquel Effect. Raquel Welch's history with Carson's show ran longer than almost anyone else on this list. Documented appearances stretch across 1968, 1969, 1970, 1974, 1980, and 1988, spanning 2 full decades of American television. Her first visit, aired June 19, 1968, set the tone. Carson, ever the showman, opened by teasing her about the whiteness of her dress before pivoting to something more pointed. Did being called a sex symbol bother her? Site index equals 6-1. Welch answered candidly that it used to frustrate her, because the label seemed to carry a stereotype of shallowness and limited ability. But she'd since made peace with something she couldn't fully control. Site it was a rare moment of a Hollywood sex symbol addressing the label head-on, on network television, years before that kind of conversation became common. Her March 5, 1974 appearance came with its own stakes, timed to promote her CBS special Really Raquel just days before The Three Musketeers hit theaters. The appearance was followed shortly after by a Golden Globe win, cementing 1974 as a genuine high point in her career. Across 2 decades of visits, Welch became one of the show's most reliable and requested guests, proof that whatever the Raquel effect actually was, it never seemed to fade. But of everyone Carson ever wanted on that stage, one name topped his list of guests who got away, and she never appeared. Actor number 8, Marilyn Monroe. She's the only name on this list who never sat in a chair. Marilyn Monroe died in August 1962. Johnny Carson didn't take over as permanent host of The Tonight Show until October of that same year, meaning the timelines simply never crossed. She was never a guest, never interviewed, never once part of the Carson era in any literal sense. And yet, by every account from people who worked alongside him for decades, Monroe haunted the program anyway. Carson referenced her for years afterward, using her as a kind of unspoken benchmark whenever a new actress or sex symbol sat down across from him, the standard against which an entire era of Hollywood glamour was measured, whether the guest of the night realized it or not. What's notable is how that fascination evolved. In Carson's earlier years hosting, references to Monroe leaned on her image as the ultimate blonde bombshell. By the 1980s and 90s, as cultural understanding of her life deepened, her attempts at serious dramatic study, her intellectual interests, the pressures that came with being reduced to an image, Carson's comments reportedly grew more reflective, more sympathetic to the complicated reality behind the icon. She became, in a strange way, the most talked about guest Carson never had. Not because of what she said on his show, she never said anything at all, but because of everything he imagined she might have said, had the timing of 2 American legends ever actually lined up.